Housing San Mateo, an introduction to the housing element update. Before we begin, we want to go over how to use your Zoom in case you're new to this. So to start with, please keep yourself muted, which looks like the leftmost microphone icon with the red line through it. And during the discussion section of this meeting that'll happen later on, if you could keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, we'd really appreciate it. We'd also love to see your face if possible, so we encourage you to keep your video on as well. In the middle of your navigation bar is the participants button. Clicking on this will let you see who else is here, and in some versions you can also give nonverbal feedback like raising your hand. The chat button is right next to participants, so click on this when you submit a comment or question during the Q&A or discussion segments. We will be keeping it closed between question and answer segments to reduce distractions. Finally, the reactions button lets you provide a quick thumbs up, and in other versions, this is where you'll go to give your nonverbal feedback if you'd like to do that. Our agenda today will start with going over why we're here and why it matters. I'll then hand it over to your city staff for an overview of San Mateo before we open it up to a discussion, and we will then wrap up and be done by 7:30. So we're going to get things started by going over the purpose of this meeting, the Let's Talk Housing effort, and go through some introductions. The purpose of this meeting is twofold. It's to provide you with an introduction to the housing element update that's just beginning, so you can learn more about what it is, the timeline, and some countywide housing trends. And it's for us to hear more about your big picture thoughts about housing needs and how you want to be involved as this process continues. This is an introductory meeting, and some of us might be new to learning about this process, while others may be already have learned a lot about this before. So if you're someone that's familiar with this subject and you're really interested in learning more about RHNA, we held a dedicated meeting on this subject on April 22nd. And a video of that meeting and an FAQ will be available on the Let's Talk Housing website in the next week or two. And if you aren't sure what that acronym means yet, we're going to get to that shortly. But wherever you're at, there will be many meetings held in the months to come. So please get involved through the Let's Talk Housing and City of San Mateo websites. With that being said, particularly in this online environment, it's important for us to go over some ground rules. With one of the goals of this meeting being for us to hear from you, please only share your questions for us or responses to our questions in the chat, and avoid debating with one another. Again, this is an introductory meeting at the beginning of a process meant to inform and gather your initial thoughts. We understand that there are a lot of different interests converging at these meetings, so please be respectful of everyone and don't interrupt so we can create a space where people are comfortable to share their thoughts. There are no right or wrong answers, and if you're someone that stands back when questions are asked, we definitely encourage you to step forward, and vice versa. If you're someone that's very comfortable stepping forward, we encourage you to step back a bit so others can contribute as well. And related to this, we will do our best and encourage everyone participating to join us in creating a space where we all have an equal chance to speak. Now, with that being said, Let's Talk Housing is ultimately all about hearing from you. Let's Talk Housing is an outreach effort of all of the jurisdictions in San Mateo County. That's all the cities, towns, and the county, to increase awareness of and participation in this housing element update process. Since 2008, all of these jurisdictions, including the city of San Mateo, have met regularly to collaborate on housing policy. This has included sharing what's working, responding to new laws, and exploring potential policies and programs. And this effort was named 21 Elements. It's not a nonprofit or an organization. It's just a group of housing staff from all of the jurisdictions in the county that have found they can do more together than apart when it comes to planning housing policy. Although they've all collaborated on housing policy for more than 12 years, including 2 past housing element updates, they've never tried this type of countywide outreach about city-specific processes before. It's basically an experiment, and if it's helpful, we're going to continue it, and if it's not, we're going to regroup and change course. But we really thought that this could be one more way to expand who we hear from, because it's more important than ever that we hear from as many people as possible, to both state housing laws and to all the jurisdictions. So our plans match housing needs of our community. The effort includes a website, there'll be email and text updates that you can sign up for. This series of countywide meetings, which will be followed up by a video and survey that'll be online. We're going to have additional meetings and events in other languages to follow. And we're forming an equity advisory group made up of community members and organizations to ensure we hear from as many people in the community as possible and are able to meet people where they are at. Here's the website, and Linda will share that in the chat. And we really encourage you to learn more about housing and upcoming events in your city or town by visiting. And we're going to be adding a lot of content in the months to come. There's a lot of people in this meeting involved with Let's Talk Housing, so I'm just going to give a quick overview. My name is Brandy Campbell-Wood, and I'm from Baird & Driscoll Community Planning. And Baird & Driscoll has facilitated 21 Elements, which I mentioned before, has facilitated all of those meetings and helped the jurisdictions with housing issues since 2008. So we're basically technical consultants that function as an extension of staff to get things done. Again, Let's Talk Housing is the countywide outreach effort that grew out of all of the jurisdictions working together on this housing element update, and that's why I'm here. And I'm joined by my colleagues, and we're here to help present this meeting and assist with the conversation that comes later. We're also joined by your city staff, and they will be introducing themselves a little bit later. So now that you have an idea of who is in the room on our end, we'd really love to learn who is here with us today. My colleague Josh is going to launch a poll right now. So please take a minute to fill it out, and there'll be 5 questions. So if you could keep scrolling down until you've answered the 5th, that would be great. And we'll give you a minute to complete this. I just want to reiterate while you fill this out that it's really important we reach as many people in our community as possible. And that's why we're asking a bit about who you are. Letting us know will help us better understand who we're hearing from, but more importantly, who we might be missing as this outreach effort continues. Great, thank you for filling it out. And I'm going to continue while you finish wrapping that up. Really appreciate you filling out the poll. So we're now going to get into what a housing element is, the update process, and some countywide trends. Basically, a housing element is a local housing plan for the homes needed in every community. While local governments don't build housing, they do create the rules that shape where housing can be built, what types of housing, and how much of it. The housing element or plan is essentially that. It includes policies and programs that address housing needs for all types of households, including those with special housing needs or at different income levels. And it also has solutions like how to preserve existing housing, particularly affordable housing. So California state law requires that every city, town, and county update their housing element about every 8 years. And the last cycle was for 2015 to 2022. And this update will be for the housing in your community from 2023 to 2031. So there are a lot of parts to a housing element, including several studies and analyses, like the housing that is there now and what housing is needed, any constraints or issues that will make housing in certain areas hard to develop, and identifying sites where it's possible to add new housing. There's also a review of goals, policies, and programs, and figuring out new ones. And there'll be new considerations for fair housing laws, which will address discrimination and segregation in housing, and environmental justice to reduce health risks and address the needs of disadvantaged communities. Also, again, the state requires that housing elements engage community members in discussing housing needs. So the final plan truly does need to reflect and respond to community concerns and priorities. So how it all works is it starts with the general plan. Every city, town, and county has one that guides all the ways they are planned, managed, and grow, from our roads and sidewalks to our parks and neighborhoods. One very important part or chapter of the general plan is the housing element, which is the plan for all the homes needed in a community. This includes homes for all the people that work here and might not be able to live here right now as well. It can help to think of it as the housing we need minus the housing we have equals the housing we need to plan for. And thank you everybody for filling out the poll. One part of the housing element update is the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, which I mentioned earlier in the meeting. It's a target number required by state law that provides a guide for how much housing to plan for. The California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, calculates a total for the Bay Area based on several factors like jobs, economic growth, population, and unmet housing needs due to existing housing shortages. And the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, then decides on the share for each city, town, and county after a lengthy process. And they took into account their size, the number of jobs, regional growth projections, and other factors. And it's not the most important part, but it is something that is on a lot of people's minds. So it's just really good to explain it a bit. So what this process looks like is based on your input over the next year, several studies and analyses, policies and programs will be developed to respond to housing needs. And this will all go into developing a draft housing element. After more public input, public hearings, and review by the state, it'll become a final draft. And that final draft will be adopted by your community and then certified by the state as being in compliance with state housing laws. It is then part of the general plan, informing the housing policy and programs in your city or town over the next 8 years. And its goal will be to support the creation and preservation of housing that is needed in your community. The process typically looks like this. Throughout the rest of this year, there'll be a lot of community outreach. Cities and towns will simultaneously be assessing what happened since the last update and developing a draft. And this will be informed by all those studies as well as your input and state laws. A draft will be released during the spring of 2022 for public review, followed by public hearings with your planning commissions and councils in the fall of 2022, and an initial review by the state. And after edits have been made, a final draft will be adopted by the council and submitted to HCD for final certification in January 2023. So I know that might be a lot to digest. So we're going to spend a minute or two answering your questions about the overall housing element update process and timeline if you have any. So we're opening up the chat now. And if you could put your questions in there, we will get to them. And if we get, for some reason, hundreds of them, we will respond to all of them later after the meeting and share them with attendees. And remember, any questions you have that are specific about San Mateo, if you could save those for our discussion in a little bit, we'd really appreciate it. Right now, we're just looking to clear up any confusion about the housing element update process.
Randy, I'll just take the opportunity to say sorry that white or Caucasian got left off the race categories. That's simply a copy paste error. We'll fix it for the next meeting.
And does anyone have any questions about the housing element update or the process? Okay, I'll move on, but if one pops in your head, please put it in the chat. We definitely want to make sure we answer any questions you have. So now that we talked about what a housing element update is, let's share some overall trends for the entire county. This is not specific to the city, but it's just the whole county of San Mateo. The Bay Area is a great place to live, but throughout the region, the county, there just isn't enough housing for all income levels. And that's made costs go up. And this has a lot to do with there being a lot of new jobs. We have a really strong economy and have for decades, and that's really great. And while some communities have more jobs and some have less, overall, we just haven't built enough housing the past 30 years to keep a balance with the amount of jobs we keep adding. Since 2010, we've added over 100,000 jobs, but only 10,000 homes. Additionally, our population is growing naturally with more people living longer, which is also great. and our children growing up and moving out into homes of their own. And all this totally means that there's not enough housing to meet the need and keep things in balance. And it's easier to meet that need for market rate housing because developers will build it and those who can afford it will pay for it. However, it's a bit more complicated when trying to make enough low to moderate income housing, which requires more subsidies to make them pencil out. Ultimately, not having enough housing across all incomes has meant rents and prices are higher. The Bay Area is known throughout the country as being an expensive place to live, and it is similarly so in the county. While there are lots of good jobs and some are making a lot more than others, wages for many haven't kept up with how costly it is for housing in our economy. A lot of people are spending 30% or more of their income on rent, which is considered cost burdened. In fact, 1 in 4 renters spend more than 50% of their income on their rent. And while rents have declined during COVID, renters already paying a lot toward rent have seen little relief. So let's take a look at what that actually means. The median income, meaning the middle spot between the lowest and highest wages in the county, is $121,000 for a single person. So if you're a grocery store clerk or a barista making minimum wage, which is $15 an hour, you're going to make $29,000 a year based on a 40-hour week. And this is considered extremely low income because it's less than 30% of that 100% wage. And if you are a school administrator or a social worker, even you with an hourly wage of $45 an hour and an $86,000 a year salary are defined as low income in the county, making less than 80% of that 100% wage. And you too are almost cost burdened, paying nearly 30% of your income on rent. So what are some of these impacts? I think we've all experienced them. Overall, people are paying too much of their income on housing. This has resulted in overcrowding or people living with more roommates or family members that the home can hold. This can also mean people stay in unsafe or unhealthy living conditions because they don't have other options. People are also moving further away to places with more affordable rents and home prices, and that results in them having longer commutes to work. And with more workers we depend on moving away due to high costs, we all have to deal with more traffic and the impacts of that. Sometimes people can no longer make the direct and indirect costs of traveling far for work pencil out, and they leave our communities for good, which can have a lot of ripple effects. San Mateo County has always been a great place to live and raise a family, and that's why so many have moved here over the years, and so many now are growing old here. With more people 55 and over than there were 10 or 20 years ago, we need to simultaneously address how to continue supporting our seniors as they get older, so they can stay in their homes and communities, and make sure young people, families, and the workforce not only can find housing here, but want to move here because it's the housing they want. Ultimately, this housing element update provides an opportunity to develop policies and programs that can respond to all the phases of life our community members experience. I'm now going to turn this over to your City of San Mateo staff to provide an overview of San Mateo's trends, housing, and the housing element update process and timeline. And I will stop my share.
Great, can everyone see that?
There we go. Okay. My name's Sandy Council. I'm the housing manager from the City of San Mateo. I'm going to do a short presentation. We have other members of our team here on the call also to help answer questions and guide us through this next section. Julia Klein's our planning manager. We also have Christina Horsberger, who's our community development director. We have 2 other staff people, Nikki Vu and Linda Lee, and we have our consultant, Diana Elrod. So all of us are working together to try to work on this housing element and bring us all together. Let's see, I think we're going to skip that, yeah, okay. So I'm just going to share a short overview on some demographic factors that we think are informative in evaluating housing needs and trends. Brandy just gave you quite a bit of information on the county overall. I'm going to drill down a little bit more specific to San Mateo. So if you look over the last, since 1980, our population's increased about $26,000, or 26,000, or about 26%. Also, I don't have this as a graph, but the number of housing units has increased 8,000 over that same time period. So that also demonstrates what Brandy was talking about, the gap between the increase in population versus the increase in housing units. Next slide. So here's some information. Again, Brandy was just talking about age. Although we hear a lot about the housing needs of the aging baby boomers, 65 and older, and that is a significant income group, and those folks are living longer and staying in their houses. Also check out the 20 to 34-year-old. That is actually our largest sector of residents at this point in time. And this is the age where a lot of young adults are moving and forming their own households. So even without an increase in population, there's still, there could be an increase in demand for housing, just as those residents move on and form their own households. Income, we have quite a diversity of incomes in San Mateo. Our median is a little higher than the countywide average, but we still have 19% of our community that makes less than $50,000, and 35% makes less than 100. And so that does impact families' abilities to pay for the cost of housing, which next slide will show a little bit. This is just based on median asking rents and home prices that we pulled off the internet just last month. This is not what people are necessarily paying who have lived in their housing for some time. But if you were looking for housing right now because you had to move for whatever reason, or you're just coming into the community for a new job, a 1-bedroom rent, the median rent would require somebody to make $79,000 to afford that. And it would take an income of $105,000 to afford the median 2-bedroom rental right now. And so we know that that about 35% of our community cannot afford these rents. And to buy a house, to buy a median income priced house at $1.4 million requires an income of over 200,000. So this just sort of demonstrates the high housing costs that we all know about and are experiencing. So who lives here? We're almost split between owners and renters in San Mateo. Slightly few more owners than renters. Also, I don't have a slide on this, but we also have quite a mix of the types of housing people live in. About 55% of our residents live in single family homes, but the other 46% is in multifamily units. So we have quite a diversity and mix of housing types, owners and renters that live in our community. Okay, next. This graphic shows where people live versus where they work. In San Mateo, interestingly enough, about the same amount of people live here and work elsewhere, or live elsewhere and come in and work here. Only about 7,000 of our residents both live and work in San Mateo. So those are the lucky ones that don't have to face the commute traffic that all the other commuters do. Okay, so one of the things we'll be working on for our next housing element is to develop programs and policy to address our housing needs. Some of these programs we have in place, so we have a good base to get started. I'll just go over a couple of the programs that we do have in place. So we have inclusionary, we call it our below market rate housing policy, and that requires that private market rate developers provide a portion of their units to be affordable. The standard is 15% right now. And these units consist of both rental and ownership units, and they address a number of different income groups as well. We also have a first-time homebuyer program, which is a way that we provide ownership opportunities for both the BMR units that the private developers provide, as well as a number of homebuyer units that the city has co-developed with some developers in the past. So we have a number of units that are available that turn over from time to time, and new buyers can come in and buy them. We have waiting lists for both rentals and the home buyer programs that that are on our website. So if people are interested in those programs, they can look there. We have a commercial linkage fee. This is a fee that we charge developers of office and commercial space, because the more commercial space that is built, the more jobs that are in community, and the more pressure that it creates on the housing units that we already have. So the linkage fee is a way to address the impact of more commercial and more jobs in the community by providing some funds that can be used to support housing, specifically affordable housing in the future. Accessory dwelling units, these are those secondary units that people can add to their existing homes. The city has amended our ordinance over the last couple of years to comply with recent state legislation that makes ADUs easier to get built. We also instituted a flat fee for these units to help lessen that burden. And we're currently working on further updates to the city's ADU ordinance. But just to give you an example, just a few years ago in 2017 or 18, we issued building permits 5 and 8 for ADUs in those years, versus the last 2 years we've issued 45 in 2019 and 52 in 2020. So it shows that there is interest in this program, and people are starting to look at adding units to their own homes. And so we will continue, like I said, we'll continue to work on policies to streamline that more as we move forward this year, as a matter of fact. And then affordable housing projects. The city has a number of affordable funding sources, the commercial linkage fee that I mentioned before, some other sources. We participate with various state and federal programs that provide resources to support affordable housing. We've been doing this for over 30 years. We have used those funds to build new housing. We've used it to purchase and rehab existing housing. We've used it for homeless shelters. We've used it for housing for people with special needs, for seniors, for families, both rental, ownership. We've tried to use our funds to address the whole gamut of housing needs, and so we will look to do that in the future, and perhaps even focus on specific groups as we work through the process. We also have a home repair and rehab program for low-income homeowners. It turns out it's primarily senior citizens, but it's open to anyone who's meets our income requirements, and we think it's important to preserve the housing that we have, especially for people who can't maybe afford to make those repairs on their own. So that is also a program that we have. And then we work in partnership with many community organizations. There's many organizations in our community that help provide housing related services, everything from emergency rent assistance to legal assistance, shared housing, assistance to folks who have special needs and homelessness. And so we can't all do this on our own, and these organizations are very important. And we have either continued to work with them on special programs, or in some cases provided them some grant funding to help spread their mission in our community. And then Brandy mentioned the RHNA number. So right now in the current housing element that we're in the middle of is for the time period of 2015 to 23. It was called RENA 5. During that time period, the city was required to show that we have enough sites to accommodate 3,100 units. And we keep track of this each year and report it to our council, post it on our website, and report it to the state. So for the first 5 years through 2020, this is building permits issued. So these are units actually under construction. We issued permits for about 1,800 units. And that plus the units that have been approved that are in the pipeline, we think we will meet the goal of 3,100 by the end of 2023. Now, the next allocation, RENA 6, it looks like these numbers aren't final yet. They'll be finalized in the next few months, but it looks like San Mateo's allocation is a little more than twice what we have currently. So around $7,000 or 7,000 units, excuse me. We are just working with this number for now. We're assuming it could change up or down a little bit, but for planning purposes, that's what we're using as we start our housing element process. So that's some of the statistics. Our goal in our housing element is to try to address the housing needs of all of our community members. We also want to have a robust public engagement strategy. This is the first step. We will have workshops that are a little more meaty and give you more opportunity to share your ideas as we go throughout the year. And then we also have a goal to further fair housing. Our timeline is similar to what Brandy just showed earlier. We are also working on our general plan update at the same time. These two documents definitely, well, housing element is a subset of the general plan. They will inform each other. We are coordinating our meetings as well as the general plan meetings so that they coordinate with each other. And as you provide us input, we can use that information for both documents. The housing element, because it's a state mandate, does have a hard deadline of having it adopted by January of 2023. So that process is actually going to be shorter than the general plan. But right now, this is just the kickoff for an overview. And basically for the rest of this calendar year, we'll be doing workshops and putting some of the statistics together and so forth. Before we draft a plan that has more information on programs and policies. So any questions so far on that? Diana, do you see any?
I do not see any comments in the chat.
My screen was black for the last 2 minutes and now the picture has returned. I assumed that was on your end, but I just thought I'd let you know in case it happened to anyone else.
It was not on our end. It had to have been on your end, I'm sorry to say.
Okay, well, you're back, so.
Oh dear. Well, you know what? These slides will be on our website. So if you miss some pictures or some charts, feel free to look at them afterwards. At least you could hear us though, I hope. Okay, so a couple of years ago in 2019, the city hosted some community conversations on housing. And those meetings were just a way to get people talking to each other. And some of the things that we heard during those conversations were highlighted here. Housing costs are deeply affecting the quality of life for some of our residents. Traffic and parking impacts of new developments are impacting our residents. There was a sentiment that more affordable housing options for all income levels and all stages of life was needed for our community. People were concerned that families and friends were moving away. And then others were very concerned with maintaining the character of San Mateo with all this new development and growth. So what we'd like now is, and you can just do this in chat. Do you think that things have changed since we had those workshops, with the pandemic and all kinds of changes in our life? Do you think some of these housing related concerns and issues have changed? Are there other things we need to consider? So now we're just looking, if any of you want to share some ideas, you can just throw those into chat.
I have one question. It's when do RENA numbers become final? I'm happy to answer that. The draft allocations are due sometime this late spring or summer. There will be an appeals process whereby jurisdictions who wish to appeal their allocations can do so to ABAG, the regional agency. And then the final allocations will take place by the end of the year or in wintertime sometime. So far I've not had any other comments, questions for any of these things on the screen. We can give it a few minutes.
Yeah.
We got one. Sorry, it went directly to me.
Okay.
If everyone, you can email Diana or chat with her directly, but does San Mateo have a plan for workforce housing? Or is that what the housing element is?
Yes. I think that our current housing element does have provisions to try to support housing for all income levels. So depending on what your definition of workforce housing is, a lot of people have different definitions of that. If that's important to you, that is definitely something that the new housing element would build on the last housing element. And so I think when people talk about workforce housing, it's acknowledgement that even if you have a decent job, you still can't afford to live here, right? At least that's the way that we usually talk about it. And so that's why even in our inclusionary program, which I mentioned before, we have housing units that assist everybody from living on Social Security to people who make what normally would be considered pretty good wages in other parts of the country. Some of our programs, especially the ownership programs, can assist households who make over $100,000, even $150,000, depending on their household size. So yes, if that's the sort of policies that you think that we should focus on, that's certainly the sort of thing that we'll be looking to get in the next few months from all of you.
Okay, I've started getting a bunch of comments and questions. I want to just make one note that I know there are a lot of people that might have multiple questions, and I'll try to get it to everybody's, but I'm going to try, if I don't get to your question right away, please be patient with me, and if we will hopefully be able to get to everyone's questions and comments. Thanks. Okay, question. This is a comment. I'm worried about homelessness spiking when eviction moratoriums are lifted. I don't know if there's a comment that needs to be made about that. I think that's probably true. Another comment, the need for affordable housing is greater than ever. Our teachers, first responders, and service workers need more affordable housing options. Does middle income housing need to be subsidized? Are the housing types that are more accessible to middle income people by design?
Well, that's an interesting question. Essentially, was somebody speaking?
Sandy, can I
Sure.
weigh in? So
Yeah,
this is Josh
absolutely.
Abrams with 21 Elements. We're actually going to study, or in the middle of studying that question. For instance, do duplexes and triplexes tend to rent for less? And also, are there things, another policy question is, are there things cities can do to get smaller units, maybe not smaller number of bedrooms, but smaller units and other things to get naturally market rate units to be naturally a little more affordable. So it's definitely an important topic for the housing element.
And just to add to that, because one of the realities is, given the high costs of land and development, the private sector does tend to build the more luxury type units, and they don't build those more standard or basic units just due to those costs. So like as Josh mentioned, if there's ways that we can encourage more modest housing to be built that's less expensive and therefore more affordable, we'll be looking at that.
Great. I have a comment. Success for San Mateo looks like a walkable, sustainable community where a diverse population can afford to live. Lots and lots of new housing for all income levels. Next question is, where can we apply for a BMR house or purchase a house, or how to be on the waiting list?
The city of San Mateo.org is our city website. And if you click on community development and the housing division, there's a place to get information about those wait lists.
Great.
Oh, maybe Nikki, you could put something in the chat there, the link to the find the specific web page.
Sure. Yeah.
Drop that
I
link
would have
in.
to stop sharing my screen though.
Oh wait. Oh, Linda, could you do that?
Yeah, that's probably better.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm curious how many apartments have been converted to condos from the 1980s to the present, and what can the city do to make sure new apartments stay apartments and are not converted to condos?
So maybe Julie can correct me if I'm wrong, but not very many apartments have switched to condos since the 80s. I think that was something that was popular in the 70s and maybe the early 80s, but it's been pretty rare since the late 80s anyway. If an apartment building is switched to a condo, there's pretty strict requirements. That the city has a condo conversion ordinance, and there's pretty strict requirements about assisting the renters, relocating them and giving them first chance to purchase their own unit, etc. So it doesn't happen very often. Julia, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, you're correct. It doesn't happen very often, and the zoning and subdivision requirements for an applicant, to kind of go through that process is difficult. Usually, with an apartment complex that was, built perhaps, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, to try to meet current zoning code requirements and building code requirements, it's usually, quite a bit of a challenge. So we don't see a lot of these conversions. I don't have any specific data for the last 20 years, but we can look into that and then share some of that information post this workshop.
Thank you. Here's a question about RHNA. Is it unusual that San Mateo's RHNA numbers have doubled, and do we have to accept them? How do we appeal, and when is the deadline? Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to go ahead and answer it? Yes, it's unusual, but every jurisdiction pretty much throughout the state has received a significantly larger allocation this time around. And the reason is because the state has, in part, the legislation has required the state to consider unmet or lack of production to meet the needs from prior years. It also includes changes in the way that certain housing needs are calculated into the allocation process. And so basically, some jurisdictions actually, like in Southern California, got as 5 times as many units allocated to them than the last go around. The situation is obviously difficult here in the Bay Area. The number originally allocated to the entirety of Bay Area last time around was about 189,000 units. And this time around, it was 441,000 units. So pretty much every jurisdiction got a significant bump up in the number of units. Yes, we have to accept them to the extent that these are required by law, and the appeal process is pretty narrowly defined about how a jurisdiction can appeal its numbers. The deadline we don't know yet, because the clock starts ticking once ABAG issues its quote unquote draft allocations. The official draft allocations, what we have so far, is an informal draft allocation because they couldn't call it that until the state approved the methodology, which they have done so. So we don't know right now when the deadline for appealing will be, but as I said, the appeal process will occur sometime probably this summer. We have a person here who's indicated that they have reached out to organizations to getting help with housing, and this person is at risk of becoming homeless on June 1st and feels as though there's a lot of confusion about where to go to get support.
Well, I'm going to put a plug into Samaritan House at this point. Samaritan House is the core service agency for our community, and they coordinate with a multitude of other organizations, and anyone who has housing or homeless issue should just call Samaritan House as a first stop. And if they don't help you themselves, they will do the appropriate referrals. It is confusing because there are so many agencies out there. And so that's why we've developed the system to use Samaritan House as sort of the triage, as the central place to get information. So that's what I would encourage in that situation.
The next one is, and remember, if I don't get to your question or comment, it means that I'm checking to make sure that other people who haven't spoken up yet are getting heard. What percentage of recently built housing has 3 bedrooms for families with children?
Well, I don't have that statistic off the top of my head. Something we can look into and respond to after this presentation.
Okay. Are duplexes, triplexes more affordable than detached single houses? That might be a Josh question.
I'm not sure that I
yeah, are duplexes and triplexes? Yes, they are. The question is how much?
Right. We don't know exactly how much they're less expensive than single family detached houses, but they are less expensive because economies of scale for no other reason.
Well, they're less expensive to build, right? And then they're also, when you're buying them, you don't have as much access to outdoor space, and you're sharing a wall with someone. There's a bunch of reasons they tend to rent or sell for a little less. But that's part of the study we're doing. So we'll have better information about that.
Right. Somebody commented, duplex and triplex units can be subdivided for sale, not just rental, if the single family zoning is changed to allow for sale units. I guess they mean for duplex and triplexes. Somebody asked again about the appealed arena numbers. It is specifically, can anyone appeal them? It has to come from the agency to which they have been allocated. An individual can make a comment, but the actual appeal process comes from a legislative body like the city council. Let's see. The city should use all data-driven metrics available to ensure that current market data is reflected in the housing element. COVID-19 has made such an impact in the housing market and the economy at large, so market realities must be recognized. Thank you. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. Unfortunately, those aspects, when a lot of jurisdiction issued letters to the state asking for a pause in the RENA allocation and the housing element process, specifically because of COVID, but the state's response is that there is no mechanism in order to pause the RENA allocation and housing elements because the deadlines for both are statutorily defined. That would require changes in state law. Can our city officials create a policy that requires the general contractors to hire locally and require an apprenticeship program that is state approved?
I don't know the answer to that. I know there are cities that have instituted local hiring policies. I know there are a lot of legal issues involved with that. So, that's not something I'm an expert on.
Somebody offered legal aid as a good resource for people who are facing possible eviction. Just an FYI. Can someone provide a link to the allocation numbers for each county? I don't have that off the top of my head, unfortunately. Sandy, do you?
Well, on our housing element webpage, we do have a link to the RENA numbers. If Linda can search through the web and find that.
I'll find the link and put it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Great,
Thanks,
thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
If we were to appeal our RENA number, is there a chance we could actually end up getting a higher number? Then I'll answer that one. And the answer is yes. And what happens with the RENA allocation will go to the county, and it's distributed county-wide. And so if there are, let's say, 100 units and San Mateo says it gets 10 and says, no, we only need 5, or for whatever reason that we are able to demonstrate that 5 is the right number, the 5 that we would have had otherwise to make the 10, those 5 have to go to another jurisdiction within the county. So if you make an appeal, you're by definition going to require, and you get your numbers lower, some other jurisdiction is going to get their number higher. So it is quite possible for a jurisdiction to get a higher number because someone was successful in appealing their number. Now, that said, more than 50 jurisdictions appealed their numbers in Southern California, and only 2 were granted those appeals, and those appeals were minor adjustments of units. So the idea that the city is going to come up with hundreds of or thousands more units is virtually nil. How often is the red tag ordinance in San Mateo, I'll start that again. How often has the red tag ordinance in San Mateo been applied against landlords who keep their properties in substandard conditions?
I can take that one.
Okay, thanks. It's a handful.
Yeah, so over about the past year or so, we've used our tenant relocation ordinance, I believe 8 times successfully to get folks out of uninhabitable living situations. There have also been a couple of times when, including one very recently, where we have offered the tenant relocation assistance and were refused from the tenants to have the assistance. I think once, possibly twice, but we definitely have used it successfully to get folks out of unsafe situations fairly quickly.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are there any penalties for not meeting RENA numbers? Yes. First, meeting RENA numbers, meaning making sure that we have enough land zoned at appropriate densities, which includes high density for housing, for multifamily housing, specifically for affordable. We have to have enough land zone for that housing. It does not mean that the city has to develop that housing or ensure that that housing gets developed. So, but the penalties for not finding enough land and zoning it appropriately for that housing can be a combination of penalties of fines up to $10,000 per unit that is not meeting the allocation. It can mean putting the city at risk of lawsuits because it doesn't have a compliant housing element. So a developer could ask a judge, and a judge could impel the city to approve projects without any review whatsoever. It basically could end up, the city could lose all of its control over development based on the fact that it doesn't have a compliant housing element. And I think probably more onerous and for a lot of jurisdictions is many sources of funding are tied to whether or not a housing element is compliant, including transportation dollars, other housing dollars, things that both at the state and federal level that would require the city having a certified housing element in order to receive funds. So it's not just it's not a little, let's not do it. We have to do it. So let's see. Does the RENA allocation distinguish between studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units, or are they all considered to have the same value in terms of meeting the RENA goals? They do not distinguish by unit size, they distinguish by unit income allocation, i.e. is it affordable to a person earning very low incomes or whatever. Brandy has posted the RENA methodology report, including the number of the cities in the chat. In fact, there were two of them, one from David and from Brandy. So if you didn't like one, you got the other. I'm still looking to see, are there any more questions or comments? Yeah, the ABAG, the document on the draft arena allocation is quite lengthy. David notes that it's page 71 is where it starts. Any more?
Okay, Nikki, do you want to flip to those questions at the end?
Are
you getting more?
Okay, yes. When I moved to, this is about what does success look like. When I moved to the
Okay.
Bay Area over 5 years ago, I experienced housing insecurity and I'm still dealing with residual trauma of what it was like not knowing if I could afford rent and my BART fare or groceries. I lived in a closet in one bedroom with 2 other roommates for the first 6 months, and then over the course of the next 2 years, moved 5 times. A successful San Mateo for me looks like abundant housing at all income levels so that no one has to make the decision between rent and groceries.
So one of the other things that we are really trying to focus on is making sure that we hear from our entire community. If you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to include everyone in our conversations, at least in the near future, we are restricted with COVID and are relying on these virtual meetings. We know this isn't always a great way to reach out to people, so we're looking very eagerly to the time when we can actually meet in person, talk to people one-on-one and so forth. So we are just trying to look at every way we can to engage our community. So if anyone has any ideas, we'd like to hear about that. Some of you already commented on what does success look like for San Mateo. That will be our goal, is as we develop our housing element, if we have those sort of vision in mind, it helps us be focused on what we're trying to do. And some people already shared some comments about how things have changed and since even 2 years ago, and how we need to pay attention to those things.
A couple of comments. We have had success in getting the word out through social service agencies with short surveys to gather data. Use agencies to support that effort. A question, which is also a comment, have you reached out to people who work in San Mateo and would like to move here?
Good point.
Thank you. I also think, I mean, if I don't think we could give people the gift of time if there's not a whole lot of comment left. That's always nice. Do you have any program to cover fixer? Oh, do you have any program that allows people to buy fixer uppers and so they can buy such a, a house like that instead of a BMR?
Yeah, we don't at this point in time. We have used our housing funds to assist a nonprofit to buy like an apartment building, fix it up, and so forth. But we don't have our home repair program is targeted to low-income homeowners. So those are homeowners who already own their homes but just don't have the funds to maintain them. So if that's a huge priority, if that becomes a priority, that would be something that, as we have our upcoming workshops, those sort of ideas are the things that we'd like to hear about.
This is a question that I can answer. Is there anything to ensure parts of our communities don't bear a disproportionate burden of meeting RHNA goals? I'm concerned that certain areas become concentrated areas of low-income housing. I believe it should be spread throughout all areas. In fact, we are looking at that right now. New state laws require us to look at the inventory of housing sites through a fair housing lens, which essentially says if a community has a high concentration of poverty and lack of resources, that affordable housing should not be cited there. The idea is to make sure that affordable housing well distributed throughout the community, which is certainly something that our inventory is going to look at, and that make sure that any affordable housing where it is located has access to high quality resources. For example, educational opportunities, jobs, good, retail, grocery stores, things like that. When is the next workshop? I don't know.
We don't have that scheduled yet. Although we do have, there's one more general plan workshop that's coming up in May. We had 2 workshops in late April, and we'll be having a 3rd one to be looking at the various target areas of looking at scenarios of growth in the community and looking for feedback on that. The housing element workshops will probably start later in the summer, maybe even the fall. We're really hoping that we can do in-person workshops, but stay tuned. Get on our, this is our website, and there's a place to sign up for notices so that you are made aware of when we are having meetings, or if we're having surveys, or if we have information on the website for you to look at. That would be a great way to stay in touch with us.
The next question, I can answer part of it, but not the whole thing, because I'm not an expert in Measure Y. Does the passage of Measure Y mean that the RHNA housing must be spread all over the city rather than being focused near Caltrain stations and downtown?
Measure Y doesn't, it doesn't appear to have that impact. I mean, we're still right now looking to see whether we can accommodate those 7,000 units in our city under the current zoning. So that is what we are focusing on right now. There is a fair amount of land that could be redeveloped, aging shopping centers, older office buildings, especially those that are close to transit, that we are indeed focusing on in looking for those sites. So we don't have a final answer about that yet, but for now, we're working under the assumption that we are looking to find sites to accommodate those 7,000 units within those target areas, which is where we think the community would rather see growth at this point in time.
Here's a comment. First-time home ownership opportunities should also be prioritized. The idea regarding fixer-uppers is good. And there's a question, what is the racial composition of single-family zone neighborhoods in San Mateo compared to multifamily neighborhoods? Are the neighborhoods that allow multifamily more racially and economically diverse?
I do not know that off the top of my head. That's something we would have to research.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, somebody made the comment earlier, and Diana, you already answered it about ensuring that our affordable housing is spread out in the community and not concentrated in any one location. I just wanted to point out that is a housing element policy that we have now and have had for several years. And especially with our inclusionary requirements, no matter where a market rate housing project is built in the city, anywhere in town, they're going to have to set aside a certain amount of those to be affordable. So we do get units scattered around the community through that program. And then also when we work with, when the city works with nonprofit developers and provides affordable funding to support affordable housing, like a project that's 100% affordable, they are located all over town. They are not located all in one neighborhood. And as we have future workshops, if that's something of interest to people, we can provide some information on that. We have a map that shows where they're scattered around the community. So that is definitely something that we have been paying attention to even before these new requirements came along.
I have no more comments or questions at this time.
All right. Is that the last slide?
No,
Nikki,
I lied, apparently.
Oh.
Do you allow a developer to pay a fee rather than actually building the required BMR units?
No, not at this point in time. They have to build the units and they have to build them on site.
Do you have one-to-one house counseling to see what options fit to our case? I.e., I think this person is looking specifically for help with perhaps purchasing a BMR unit or doing some other activity to get into the BMR program.
You can always call our offices to get information about our programs. And we have staff that will certainly answer your questions and walk you through your options. Linda, you want to put our general line is 650-522-7200.
You want to write it in the chat?
Oh, if someone could, that would be super.
Yeah.
Linda, did you catch it? Yeah, good.
There you go.
Okay. Brandy, do you have anything else that, I mean, here, the Let's Talk Housing has a lot of resources, as Brandy mentioned. More and more information is being posted there. And so there's ways to share your ideas there. You can also share them directly with the City of San Mateo on our website. And
we also have a little survey for you all. So if there's other comments you have that you think of after the meeting and additional thoughts, you can let us know in the survey, but you can also let us know how this meeting was for you. If you have any constructive feedback for us, we'd love to hear it. Linda, if you could share that link in the chat. And like Sandy said, and Linda will share this next, the link to the Let's Talk Housing website. There's a lot of information. Pretty soon there'll be a City of San Mateo site that'll have a lot of specific information on it as well, and link you to all of the other resources through this entire update.
Oh, could we show the poll of who was here? I know not everybody answered, but we had a good percentage. Is that something that, there we go. Okay, so of those who are on the call tonight, a number of most people live here, and about a third of people work here as well. We have more owners than renters, but we also have about a third of the people on the call who either rent or live with family or other situations. The number, how long you've lived in San Mateo, there's a lot of long-termers on this call, but we have kind of a smattering of other and age. Over half of us are over 50, but there's also a mix there. And then the race one, which is sort of messed up, but that's okay. All right, so anyway, so thanks, this is helpful. Like I said, we're trying to reach as much of the community, different segments as we can. And we know not everybody, Zoom calls isn't for everyone. We appreciate all of you who joined us, but we'll be looking for other ways to reach out to people as well. So.
That's it, everyone.
That's
Thank
it.
you for your time. We
yeah,
really
everyone.
appreciate it. And yeah, keep in touch. Keep updated.